Hello there, and welcome back to this sleeping history episode on the quiet courage, refined beauty, and sometimes brutal turbulence behind the samurai and shoguns of old Japan. If you're settling in for a calming, thought-provoking journey to carry you toward dreamland, you've chosen well. Before we begin, I'd love to know where in the world you're listening from, and whether it's morning, afternoon, or the hush of night. Feel free to leave a comment and say hello. And if this kind of relaxing educational content soothes your mind, make sure to hit that subscribe button so you never miss an episode. All right, let's embark on a deeper wander through Japan's feudal centuries, unhurried, meditative, and several times more expansive than our last visit. Picture lamplight slipping across tatami floors, the faint ring of a temple bell in evening mist, and moonlight silvering the curve of a katana's edge. We'll drift from the twilight of the Heian court, where poets traded verse on perfumed paper, to the first stirrings of the samurai on distant frontiers. Stand beside Minamoto, no Yoritomo, as Kamakura's rule takes shape. Feel sea winds at Hakata Bay as the divine winds scatter invading fleets. Linger in Muromachi Gardens, where raked gravel and stone teach stillness, and watch banners rise over hilltop keeps as the Sengoku storms gather. We will follow Nobunaga's shock and innovation, Hideyoshi's grand unification and tea, and Ieyasu's patient path to lasting peace, until Edo's lanterns glow over quiet streets, and the sword becomes a badge of duty more than a tool of war. By the end of this expanded odyssey, you'll have met lords and wanderers alike, and glimpsed how their choices carved the country's destiny. We'll listen for the code beneath the steel bushidō's virtues of honor, loyalty, sincerity, and compassion, and step into the everyday rhythms of towns and fields. Farmers tending rice under spring blossoms, artisans at the forge coaxing a blade's soul to the surface, merchants opening shutters at dawn, children tracing kanji in temple schools, and samurai officials balancing ink and duty in peaceful offices. The story of old Japan is both severe and serene, a grand tale of warfare, law, and statecraft, and an intimate meditation on beauty, restraint, and endurance. So, dim the lights, take a slow breath, and let the wind in the pines carry you into the hush of a world where steel and silk, zen and tea, order and impermanence meet. In the hush of twilight, a soft wind sighs through ancient pines, and lantern light flickers along worn stone pathways. The air is tinged with the earthy scent of moss and the distant aroma of incense wafting from a temple hall. A solitary bell chimes in the distance, its gentle peal echoing across quiet valleys. In this tranquil hour, the spirit of old Japan comes alive. The stories of samurai and shoguns, of warriors and poets, of gardens and battlefields, all drift like mist through the mountains of memory. We begin a slow journey through feudal Japan's past. This is no hurried march through dates and battles, but a meditative wander across time. From misty Heian courtyards and early dawns when the first samurai took up their oaths, through centuries of strife and peace, we will listen as if to a far-off biwa lute narrating tales of honor and duty. Each chapter unfolds gently, like the petals of a lotus in a still pond. Together they reveal the soul of old Japan, a land where steel and silk, bushidō and beauty coexist in delicate harmony. Allow yourself to drift with the narrative, to imagine torchlight flickering on wooden castle walls, and moonlight silvering the edges of a samurai's sword. Hear the distant footfalls of warriors on a night patrol along castle ramparts, and the rustle of bamboo groves stirred by a midnight breeze. See the seasons turning in the old capital. Cherry blossoms swirling like pink snow in spring. Fireflies dancing over summer rivers. Crimson maples framing temple eaves in autumn. And the hush of snowfall blanketing Edo's rooftops in winter. Through these sensory scenes, we not only recount history, but also evoke the atmosphere of a bygone era. This audio journey is designed for rest. The tone will remain soft and unhurried, each transition as gentle as a falling leaf. We will explore the rise of the samurai class, the age of shoguns and warlords, the spiritual code of bushidō, and the refined arts, the crafting of blades, the ritual of tea, the serenity of Zen gardens. We will witness how centuries of war culminated in lasting peace, and how in peace, the warrior found new purpose in art and learning. All will be told in quiet reflection. Let the outside world fade and step with me into the dim lantern light of history. Our story begins in an age of elegant courtiers and the faint stirrings of the samurai, in the twilight of the Heian period, many centuries ago. Dawn of the samurai, the Heian era. The setting sun casts long shadows across the imperial capital of Heian Kyo, modern-day Kyoto. In the gilded palaces, aristocrats in silk robes compose poetry by lamplight. But beyond the city's refined gardens and willow-lined canals lies a vast countryside of mountains and rice fields. There, dusk brings a different scene. Armed horsemen patrolling the perimeters of noble estates, alert for bandits or unrest. These provincial warriors are the early samurai, men of valor emerging to serve Japan's landowning elites. In this late Heian period, 794, 1185, the samurai are still a new presence, born of necessity in a land where the imperial court's reach grows ever fainter with distance. Inside the capital's walls, life moved at a different pace. Courtiers devoted themselves to elegance and refinement. On warm spring nights, they floated small boats on lily ponds and composed verses about the moon's reflection. The imperial palace was a world of silk robes and gentle music, the kotos plucked strings echoing through painted screens. By lantern light, noble ladies traded poems with gentlemen on scented paper, comparing the transient beauty of cherry blossoms to the sadness of a passing love. This courtly realm, so delicate and insular, felt a world apart from the rough-hewn provinces. Indeed, many aristocrats seldom ventured beyond the capital. To them, the frontier was an abstraction, a place from which they received taxes and occasionally troubling reports, but not a life they knew. While they perfumed their hair and practiced calligraphy, samurai out in the hinterlands kept bandits at bay and patrolled dark forests. The two worlds coexisted in parallel, one of art and ease, the other of vigilance and action. Over time, however, the lines between them would blur, as the power of the sword quietly grew. In earlier centuries, Japan had relied on conscript armies raised by the emperor's decree. But over time, as peace prevailed, the central rulers let the old armies fade away. When conflicts did arise, skirmishes with the unruly emishi tribes in the northern frontier, or outbreaks of banditry in remote provinces, the court discovered that local, skilled fighters on horseback far outmatched peasant conscripts. Wealthy regional families, able to train in mounted archery and swordsmanship, took up the duty of defense. They became protectors of their own lands, fighting with bows and blades under waving pennants. These were the first stirrings of the samurai class, not yet an official caste, but a role taken on by those with the means and mettle to bear arms in service of order. The very word samurai means one who serves, denoting their origin as armed retainers for noble lords. Many among them descended from junior branches of the imperial family itself. In the 9th century, Emperor Saga trimmed the bloated imperial lineage by sending distant princes into the provinces. Those imperial scions founded new clans, notably the Minamoto, Genji, in 814, and Taira Heike, in 825, which soon intermarried with local gentry. By the turn of the millennium, these clans had grown wealthy and entrenched in the regions. They maintained private armies of samurai to guard their estates, enforce their will, and sometimes even to challenge imperial tax collectors. As Kyoto's aristocrats, like the powerful Fujiwara family, remained engrossed in court ceremony and poetry, the real power in distant provinces shifted quietly to the hands of these warrior families. During the Heian period, 794 to 1185, the samurai were the armed supporters of wealthy landowners, many of whom left the imperial court to seek their own fortunes after being shut out of power by the powerful Fujiwara clan. The word samurai roughly translates to those who serve. Another, more general word for a warrior is bushi, from which bushidō is derived. This word lacks the connotations of service to a master. Picture a lonely manor in the provinces during this era. Night has fallen. Crickets chirr in the tall pampas grass. A crescent moon peeks over dark hills. In the manor's courtyard, a young samurai in lamella armor and a horned helmet stands guard, his longbow in hand. Across his back is slung a curved tachi sword in a lacquered scabbard, a weapon still new to the age, for it is in this period that the distinctive curved blades first come into use. The samurai's horse stamps the ground impatiently, its breath steaming in the cool air. The warrior gazes out beyond wooden palisades to the fields illuminated by moonlight. He listens for any sign of intruders, knowing that his loyalty is all that stands between his lord's domain and chaos on this silent night. Such scenes played out across Japan. By the 11th and 12th centuries, these provincial warriors had become indispensable. They escorted tax shipments to the capital, subdued rogue bands of robbers, and quelled rebellions. In return, they were granted land rights and privileges, making them stakeholders in the very soil they protected. As their influence grew, so did their pride and identity. These early samurai upheld a rough-hewn honor, personal loyalty to one's lord, courage in battle, and a sense of duty to maintain peace in their sphere. Confucian ideals of filial piety and service blended with a warrior's ethos taking root. Though a formal bushidō code was still unborn, the seeds of that philosophy were quietly germinating in these remote outposts. Though often living far from the cosmopolitan capital, these provincial warriors were not indifferent to culture. Many early samurai families took pride in mastering not only the bow and blade, but also the elegant arts revered in Kyoto. By firelight in their wooden halls, a samurai might listen as his wife or sister read aloud from the classic Tale of Genji, or he might practice writing Chinese poetry in beautiful calligraphy. Martial training and literary cultivation went hand in hand. This blend of refinement and ruggedness came to define the samurai spirit. One famous tale speaks of a young Taira warrior who rode into battle with a flute tucked in his armor. After he fell, a victor discovered the delicate instrument on his body and was moved to tears, lamenting that such a gentle soul had been lost to war. Even in an age of conflict, the appreciation of a moonlit melody or a well-crafted poem intertwined with the ethos of the bushi. Back in the capital, the imperial court largely took note of these warriors only when needed. or when the warrior's own ambitions spilled into the political arena. That moment came dramatically in the mid-12th century. Factional struggles within the court gave the samurai clans an opening. The great houses of Minamoto and Taira, long managing security on the empire's fringes, were drawn into the rivalries of emperors and regents. In 1156, during the Shogun Rebellion, samurai forces of these clans fought on opposing sides in a dispute over imperial succession. Though the rebellion was brief, it proved a harbinger of change. Never before had warrior families been so entangled in deciding who would sit on the chrysanthemum throne. Just 4 years later, another conflict erupted, the Heiji Rebellion of 1160, in which the Minamoto hoped to unseat their Taira rivals. Torches lit the night skies of Kyoto as samurai armies clashed near the palace gates. The rebellion failed, leaving the Taira clan under Taira no Kiyomori dominant at court. Kiyomori became the first samurai ever to be given a senior rank in the imperial court, chief minister, in 1167. He cemented his power by marrying a daughter into the imperial line and even placing his infant grandson on the throne, pushing aside older heirs. The courtiers must have looked on in shock. The men in armor whom they once considered mere frontier muscle were now kingmakers in the heart of the realm. Throughout these struggles, ordinary people in villages and towns carried on their lives quietly. A farmer leading his ox at dawn might see the distant dust of an armed retinue on the road, or hear the far-off echo of battle cries like thunder beyond the hills. But by evening he would be back home, drinking warm millet gruel under lamplight, the conflicts of lords as remote as the stars. It is in this late Heian twilight that the age of samurai truly dawns, not with a sudden roar, but gradually, like the slow spreading of daylight. The stage is now set for the samurai to rise to supremacy, as the old order of noble courtiers begins to fade like a dream at daybreak. In the next chapter, we will witness how the fierce Genpei War brings that dawn to its full light, forging a new rule by the sword. The rise of the shogun, Kamakura's dawn. The rivalry of the Minamoto and Taira clans reached its climax in the tumultuous Genpei War, 1185, a conflict that would reshape Japan. It began when the Taira chieftain Taira no Kiyomori's bold political moves, including installing his infant grandson as emperor, provoked a Minamoto uprising. For 5 long years, battles flared from the plains around Kyoto to the straits of the inland sea. By day, war cries echoed off forested hills. By night, distant fires glowed on the horizon. Yet even amid war's chaos, our narrative remains hushed and thoughtful, observing from afar as history quietly turns. In the final months of the Genpei War, 2 great samurai leaders emerged. Minamoto no Yoritomo, the stern and cautious commander orchestrating his clan's victory from Kamakura, and his younger half-brother Minamoto no Yoshitsune, a daring swordsman whose exploits would become legend. In the spring of 1185, Yoshitsune's forces pursued the Taira to a narrow inlet called Dan no Ura on Japan's southern coast. There, on boats rocking in tidal currents, the decisive battle was fought. Arrows darkened the sky, and the sea spray mingled with the clash of steel. Yoshitsune personally led a bold charge that broke the Taira lines, leading to a complete Minamoto triumph. As dusk fell on that day, the Taira clan was all but extinguished. Their young emperor, carried into the waves by his grandmother, vanished beneath the waters. marking the tragic end of an era. The triumph at Dan no Yura made Yoshitsune a celebrated hero throughout the land. But fame would not shield him from the cruel politics of the day. In the war's aftermath, distrust grew between the brothers Yoritomo and Yoshitsune. The shogun, wary of his siblings' popularity, eventually forced Yoshitsune to flee for his life. The great warrior who had led the Minamoto to victory met a tragic end in exile, taking his own life when cornered by pursuers. Poets in Kyoto, upon hearing of Yoshitsune's fate, wrote elegies comparing him to a bright shooting star that blazed brilliantly before falling to earth. His story, still told in hushed tones, became a poignant reminder that even in a time of triumph, sorrow was never far away. The lotus of victory carried the mud of betrayal at its roots. With their victory, the Minamoto became undisputed masters of Japan's war-torn realm. Yoritomo, pragmatic and clear-eyed, did something unprecedented. Rather than restore full power to the emperor in Kyoto, he set up his own seat of government far to the east, in the quiet fishing town of Kamakura. In 1192, Yoritomo assumed the title of shogun, establishing the Kamakura shogunate, a hereditary military government that ruled in the name of the emperor, but in reality made the shogun the true authority. The court in Kyoto, with its elegant rites and pastimes, continued as a cultural ornament, but real governance now flowed from Kamakura, where armored lords devised policies between martial training and Shinto rites at dawn. Under Yoritomo's shogunate, the samurai class was firmly enshrined at the top of society. Yoritomo formalized their privileges and obligations. Henceforth, only those whom the shogun authorized could call themselves samurai, ensuring a loyal and elite warrior caste. He rewarded his closest vassals, the loyal Gokunin, with estates and positions, binding them through ties of fealty and land. In the provinces, he appointed military governors, shugo, and estate stewards from among his followers to administer lands and levy taxes. These posts gave samurai lords direct control of local justice and administration, eclipsing the authority of the old civil governors. Feudal order took shape. Every great lord owed loyalty to the shogun, and each lesser samurai, in turn, served a lord above him. It was said the realm now had two suns in the sky, the divine emperor in Kyoto and the martial and shogun in Kamakura, but one cast a shadow beneath the brilliance of the other. Kamakura, the new power center, contrasted sharply with Kyoto's splendor. Yoritomo governed from a plain wooden hall, not a sumptuous throne room. There was little ceremony. Samurai lords arrived dusty from travel, bowing briefly before getting to matters of state. Tatami mats replaced polished stone floors. The scent of horse and leather hung in the air instead of incense. In council, Yoritomo and his commanders knelt around low tables, strewn with maps of the provinces and lists of warriors under each lord's command. Through open sliding doors, one could see the wooded hills and hear the distant crash of waves from the nearby shore. That sound of the restless Pacific was a constant reminder to Kamakura's leaders that their duty was to guard Japan, both land and sea. As dawn light filtered into the meeting hall, these men of war planned how to administer peace. It was a different kind of court, pragmatic, austere, and driven by the resolve of those who had earned their rank on the battlefield, rather than by birth. Yet, in its own way, it had a steely grace. Monks from nearby Zen temples sometimes attended to offer counsel or blessings, tying the new regime to spiritual guidance. They taught that rulership was also a form of service, a lesson the samurai took to heart. as they pledged to protect the nation and uphold justice under the watchful eyes of their shogun. Life in the Kamakura period retained a simplicity that belied the momentous change in power. Kamakura itself, nestled between wooded hills and a surf-swept bay, was no grand capital but a rustic warrior town. Samurai walked its unpaved streets with an easy informality, far from the stiff etiquette of Kyoto courtiers. They wore practical, subdued attire when not in armor, and their homes were wooden and austere. In the mornings, they might train in yabusame, horseback archery, galloping along the beach, loosing arrows at targets while sea winds whipped at the pine trees. By afternoon, those same warriors could be sitting in a Zen meditation hall, seeking inner calm. Zen Buddhism, introduced into Japan from China around this time, resonated deeply with the samurai. Its emphasis on discipline, direct experience, and the belief that salvation would come from within seemed made for the warrior's soul. Many samurai took to the practice of zazen, sated meditation, finding clarity in the sound of their own breath amid the stillness. A famous saying spread, "If one polishes the mirror of the mind, the moonlight of enlightenment will be reflected." And so they polished their minds as diligently as they polished their swords. The sword, indeed, now achieved near-sacred status. During the Kamakura era, a man's honor was said to reside in his blade. Swordsmiths became esteemed artisans, forging blades with utmost care. Imagine a forge on a cold night, the clang of hammer on glowing steel, ringing out like a temple bell, sparks flying like transient stars. Master smiths folded and refolded the tamahagane steel, layering it until the metal held both razor hardness and supple strength. They quenched red-hot blades in water with a hiss of steam, revealing the beautiful wave-like hamon along the edge, the sword's soul made visible. These swords were not merely weapons, they were works of art, imbued with the prayers of their makers. A finished katana might be presented to a young samurai in a quiet ceremony by lamplight, the steel reflecting the flame as the warrior silently vowed to live and die by its sharp honor. Yet the Kamakura piece was not without trials. In the late 13th century, a new threat loomed from across the sea. The mighty Mongol Empire had conquered China and Korea, and twice, in 1274 and 1281, the Mongols launched seaborne invasions of Japan. On those distant shores of Kyushu, samurai defenders faced an enemy unlike any before. With thunderous explosives and massed volleys of arrows, they fought fiercely to repel the invaders, battling on the beaches and in the surf. Then, in a turn of fate later seen as divine intervention, great typhoons roared out of the heavens each time, smashing the Mongol fleets. These storms, which the Japanese called kamikaze, divine winds, saved the nation. One can picture the aftermath, broken ships and driftwood washing ashore under a strange calm sky, armor-clad warriors kneeling in thanks on the wet sand as the storm clouds depart. Down in the south, on the island of Kyushu, a young samurai named Saburo found himself gazing out at the ocean one summer twilight in 1281. He was stationed at Hakata Bay, standing guard on the shoreline fortifications hastily erected to repel the Mongol invaders rumored to be approaching. The sky was painted with streaks of orange and pink as the sun sank. Saburo's armor, a sturdy boxy-o yoroi, felt warm from the day's heat. As he looked to the west, he could just make out an ominous dark line at the horizon, the masts of countless ships, slowly growing larger. Villagers from nearby hamlets had gathered behind the samurai lines, their faces a mix of fear and curiosity. Saburo inhaled deeply, smelling the salt of the sea, mingled with the earthy scent of pinewood torches that lined the defense walls. When at last the foreign fleet loomed close, drums sounded from the Mongol ships, a deep alien thunder accompanied by the whizzing howl of fiery arrows. Saburo's heart pounded, yet he recalled his Zen training. He steadied himself, planting his feet in the sand and reciting a brief sutra under his breath. Around him, 100 Japanese bows twanged, sending arrows arcing out into the dusk. The battle that followed was chaotic. Explosions from unfamiliar thunder bombs hurled by the invaders, and the crash of waves as ships tried to land. Saburo fought bravely with his long spear, repelling a handful of enemies who managed to leap ashore. Amidst the screams and smoke, he felt strangely clear-minded, focusing only on the immediate moment, as if performing a series of practiced kata in the dojo rather than facing life and death. Night fell heavy and storm clouds began gathering. The Mongol assault ebbed as they pulled back to regroup on their ships. Saburo, panting and sweat-soaked, stood watch through the dark hours. Sometime past midnight, the winds rose to a gale. Lightning flashed, illuminating for split seconds a surreal tableau. Ships' sails ripping, rain slashing down in torrents, and the sea turning white with fury. Men on shore and ship alike scrambled for shelter. Saburo huddled under his shield, praying to Hachiman, the god of war and protector of Japan. The wind's howl became deafening. By dawn, as the storm finally passed, the sun revealed a beach littered with broken timbers and debris. Not a single Mongol ship remained intact in the bay. The fleet had been devastated by what his people would come to call the kamikaze, the divine wind. Saburo wandered knee-deep into the foamy surf, helping other samurai pull half-drowned foreign soldiers ashore to be taken captive. He was shivering with exhaustion, but when he realized the enormity of what had happened, relief and gratitude flooded him. Raising his face to the clearing sky, Saburo whispered a thanks to the heavens. He later joined his comrades in erecting a small shrine on the beach from driftwood, dedicating it to the wind god. In Saburo's mind, there was no doubt Japan had been saved by celestial grace. For the rest of his days, Saburo would tell younger samurai of that terrible night, not in boastful pride of his own deeds, but in reverent awe of how the land was spared. He described how, at the height of the tempest, he had felt a strange calm within, as if an invisible hand shielded the islands. His listeners, wide-eyed, would often get goosebumps despite the warm hearth, fires they sat by. The story became part of the collective memory, a reminder that beyond the valor of men, there were greater forces at work. And so the Mongol invasions, though fierce, ultimately reinforced the samurai's faith. Faith in their gods, faith in their unity, and faith that they were destined to protect their homeland come what may. That faith, born in the heart of warriors like Saburo, became a cornerstone of the samurai spirit for generations to come. The strain of defeating 2 Mongol invasions at the end of the 13th century weakened the Kamakura shogunate, which fell to a rebellion led by Ashikaga Takauji. The Ashikaga shogunate, centered in Kyoto, began around 1336. For the next 2 centuries, Japan was in a near-constant state of conflict between its feuding territorial clans. After the particularly divisive Onin War of 1467–77, the Ashikaga shoguns ceased to be effective, and feudal Japan lacked a strong central authority. Local lords and their samurai stepped in to a greater extent to maintain law and order. Not all in Kamakura was devoted to war and administration. The spiritual life of the samurai capital also flourished. In 1252, work began on a colossal, great Buddha statue in the seaside town, a representation of Amida Buddha, cast in bronze, towering over 50 feet high. When it was completed, monks chanted sutras, and samurai commanders laid down their swords momentarily to bow before the serene visage of Buddha. This Daibutsu of Kamakura sat in the open air beneath the sky, enduring through storms and seasons. Many a warrior came to sit in its shadow, contemplating the gentle smile on the Buddha's face, and finding solace from the burdens of duty. They saw in that countenance a promise of eternal peace beyond the turmoil of this world. The great Buddha still gazes out across time, as calm today as when Kamakura's warriors once knelt in its presence, praying for guidance and giving thanks for survival through times of strife. In the aftermath of Kamakura's fall, a new clan stepped into the vacuum, the Ashikaga, who would establish their own shogunate amid the chaos. But that next chapter is one of flickering stability and growing discord. For now, we pause at the turning of the tide. The Kamakura dawn has given way to an unsettled noon. The samurai, ascendant and irrevocably woven into the fabric of governance, will face new tests of their spirit in the eras to come. As we proceed, the once unified realm will splinter, and from that fracturing will eventually come new growth, cultural blossoming, and the eventual reunification of the land. But first, we must enter an age of warlords and fractured loyalty, the shadowed landscape of Muromachi, Japan. Ashikaga twilight, art and turmoil in Muromachi, Japan. The fall of Kamakura's regime ushered in the Muromachi period, 1336–1573, named after the district in Kyoto where the new shogun, Ashikaga Takauji, established his headquarters. Yet this victory of the samurai was bittersweet and unstable. In the early years, two rival imperial courts, one in Kyoto, backed by the Ashikaga, and another in the south loyal to the ousted emperor, claimed legitimacy. For decades, the land knew no true peace as pretenders and partisans skirmished in a lingering twilight war. At last, around 1392, the schism was healed. The northern and southern courts merged under a compromise, and the Ashikaga were left as the acknowledged shoguns. But unlike the iron-fisted Kamakura leaders, the Ashikaga shoguns never wielded absolute power. They reigned by balancing the ambitions of provincial warlords, the daimyo, and often seemed more patrons of culture than steely warlords themselves. One such patron was Ashikaga Yoshimitsu, who became shogun in 1368. Yoshimitsu was a man of refined tastes, enamored of the arts and elegance that harkened back to the courtly age. Under his guidance, the warrior government took on a veneer of aristocratic polish. In Kyoto, Yoshimitsu built a magnificent villa with a multi-tiered pavilion that he covered in gold leaf, a resplendent symbol of the era's wealth and artistic ambition. This golden pavilion, or kinkakuji, shimmered above its reflecting pond, surrounded by Zen gardens designed for contemplation. In spring, pink lotus blossoms would float on the pond's surface, the golden structure glinting in the sunlight. In winter, snow dusted its roof as if tempering opulence with purity. The shogun held moon-viewing parties there, inviting poets, monks, and generals alike to sit beneath open eaves and compose verses by the silvery light. It was said that in those gatherings, the boundary between warrior and aristocrat melted away. All, were simply participants in the shared appreciation of beauty. In the Muromachi period, cultural pursuits provided a peaceful respite from turmoil. The Golden Pavilion, Kinkakuji, in Kyoto, built by Shogun Ashikaga Yoshimitsu, famously reflected in its serene pond and symbolized the harmony of warrior power and artistic refinement. Beneath its gilded eaves, samurai lords and noble poets would gather in the tea room to admire the moon's reflection on the water. In such moments of stillness, surrounded by whispering pines and the gentle ripple of water, even fierce warlords could experience a transcendent calm. This flourishing of culture under the Ashikaga is sometimes called the Higashiyama era, Eastern mountain culture, especially under Yoshimitsu's grandson Ashikaga Yoshimasa in the later 15th century. It gave birth to uniquely Japanese aesthetics that the samurai class embraced. Refined arts like No theater, a slow, solemn dance drama, were patronized by the shoguns and became beloved among daimyo and samurai. In dimly lit No theaters, masked actors glided across wooden stages to the haunting thrum of drums and flute, enacting epics of gods and warriors. Samurai lords, who spent their days dealing in strategy and steel, would find themselves moved to tears by a well-performed No play, sensing the impermanence of all worldly glory. Shogun Yoshimasa himself exemplified these values. In his retirement, he built the Silver Pavilion, Ginkakuji, a relatively humble villa on Kyoto's eastern hills. Unlike his grandfather's gilded pavilion, Yoshimasa's retreat eschewed outward splendor. Its wooden walls were left unpainted to weather into soft grays, and the gardens featured raked white sand, said to symbolize Mount Fuji and gentle waves. Under the moonlight, that sand garden gleamed like silver, hence the nickname. In the stillness of its grounds, with a 5-tiered pagoda and ponds fringed by maples, one could sense the wabi-sabi ideal: beauty in simplicity and the poignancy of things impermanent. Here, Yoshimasa invited artists and monks to refine the tea ceremony and flower arranging, inadvertently nurturing a cultural renaissance amid the political fragility. Zen gardens, too, left a profound mark. At temples like Ryoanji in Kyoto, 15 stones were set artfully in rippling white gravel, forming a minimalist landscape that seemed to float in a sea of sand. Samurai officials and wandering monks alike would sit on the wooden veranda overlooking this karasansui, dry landscape garden, for hours, letting their minds merge with the pattern of stones and empty space. Some said the stones resembled tiger cubs crossing water. Others thought they were peaks rising above clouds. But most agreed that the garden was not meant to represent anything. It simply was, inviting meditation on the interconnectedness of blank and form, sound and silence. In those moments of contemplation, the burdens of clan and combat fell away. A warrior could feel as centered as the stones themselves, aligned in quiet harmony with the universe. The tea ceremony also blossomed as a social and spiritual ritual. What had begun as a simple act of serving powdered green tea evolved into chanoyu, the way of tea, an intricate practice emphasizing harmony, respect, purity, and tranquility. Samurai found in tea gatherings a sanctuary from bloodshed, a space where all participants momentarily left rank and conflict at the door. In a small chashitsu, tei hut, with tatami mats and a single hanging scroll of calligraphy, a warlord and a vassal could quietly share a bowl of whisked tea as equals. Only a faint scent of tatami and roasted tea leaves perfumed the air. The tea master would ladle hot water from a simmering iron kettle into a simple rustic bowl containing fine green matcha powder. With measured movements, he whisked it to a froth, using a bamboo whisk. Every gesture was deliberate, smooth, and silent, save for the soft clink of bamboo on clay and the gentle hiss of the kettle. The samurai guests knelt and observed the etiquette they had learned, bowing respectfully as the bowl was passed, each cradling it as if it were a precious chalice. They turned the bowl slightly to avoid drinking from its front, a subtle sign of respect, then sipped the thick, bittersweet brew. In that enclosed space, even the sound of a swallow or a quiet sigh seemed amplified. Outside, a breeze might stir the leaves of a maple, but inside, the tea hut, all was still. When the last guest had savoured their portion, the host ritually cleaned the bowl, wiping it with a silk cloth with the same care one might handle a ceremonial sword. These mundane actions took on a meditative grace. The chanoyu, te, ceremony, was less about quenching thirst and more about cleansing the spirit, a brief moment where lord and vassal alike humbled themselves to simply appreciate the sharing of tea. Such moments of harmony, fleeting and subtle, strengthened bonds of trust and allowed warriors' hearts to remember peace. By the 16th century, a tea gathering could carry as much weight as a war council. A well-timed tea invitation between rival lords might broker peace or seal alliance, accomplished in an atmosphere of grace rather than force. For a time, it seemed the fierce heart of the samurai had found a balance with the love of beauty. But even as arts flowered, political stability withered. The Ashikaga shogunate never established the tight centralized control that Kamakura had. Local daimyo grew ever more autonomous and proud, fortifying their castles and vying with neighbors. The tension built like a lute string pulled too taut. In 1467, it finally snapped. The Onin War erupted in Kyoto over a succession dispute, but it spiraled into a nationwide free-for-all as rival samurai families took sides or seized the chance to settle old scores. For 10 years, the capital was a battleground. Elegant villas and temples went up in flames, including many wonders Yoshimasa himself had built. One chronicle lamented how soldiers camped in the shuttered halls of the imperial palace, and wild grasses grew in the once trim gardens of the court. When the smoke cleared around 1477, Kyoto was devastated, and the authority of the Ashikaga shattered. The shogun became a mere figurehead, unable to even leave his ruined city, while across Japan, the great daimyo made their provinces into independent realms. Samurai warlords now ruled by might and right of their own. In the wake of such upheaval, many samurai became ronin, masterless wanderers drifting through the fractured land. One might imagine a lone ronin in threadbare armor walking along the Tokaido road at twilight, his past lord dead and his future uncertain. With no castle to call home, he camped under the open sky, listening to the wind in the pines as he sharpened his sword by firelight. Yet he too sought meaning beyond survival. At wayside shrines he paused to bow, clapping his calloused hands in prayer that the gods might watch over both the living and the fallen. Sometimes he traded stories or a cup of sake with farmers at remote inns, telling of the once great capital and hearing in return the farmers' hopes for a harvest unmarred by war. In such humble exchanges, the ronin found a measure of peace and connection. He carried with him not only his weapon but also a flute perhaps, or a memoir of poems tucked in his travel pack. Small tokens of the culture that persisted through the age of anarchy. Though he had lost his lord, he had not lost his samurai soul. The land was in pieces, but the values of courage, courtesy, and the love of beauty still accompanied him on every road. These wandering swordsmen would later become the stuff of legends, proof that even in a broken world, honor could survive in the heart of an individual. This was the onset of the Sengoku Jidai, the age of warring states, a time of fractured power and ceaseless conflict that would last over a century. But before we delve into that tumultuous era, let us linger a moment longer in the calm before the storm. Picture an autumn evening in 15th century Kyoto, just after the Onion War's end. The city lies mostly in charred ruins, but at a surviving temple, a small group of weary warriors gathers for a no performance by lamplight. The stage is lit by a few candles. The lead actor, wearing a mask of an ancient hero, moves with ethereal grace as the flute plays a lonely tune. The watching samurai, some with bandaged wounds from recent battles, sit motionless. In the flicker of the flames, tears glint in their eyes. For a brief moment, in the spell of art, they remember their humanity beyond warfare. Now that moment passes. The wars will begin anew, fiercer than before. The land divided among dozens of lordly contenders, each dreaming of unifying Japan under his banner. The Sengoku era awaits, a time of desperation and heroism, of great brutality and great loyalty. In the next chapter, under the light of signal fires and the clash of steel, we will follow the samurai through their darkest hours toward the dawn of a new order, warring states, Sengoku storms, and the road to unification. The Sengoku Jidai, or Age of Warring States, descended upon Japan like a prolonged storm after the waning of Ashikaga power. In the late 15th and 16th centuries, the land was fractured into dozens of fiefdoms, each ruled by a daimyo with his own army. Alliances formed and broke with the seasons. Castles rose on every strategic hilltop, their wooden watchtowers scanning horizons for enemies. Villages fortified themselves with moats and stockades. It was a time of ceaseless vigilance. Yet amid the turmoil, moments of poignant humanity persisted. Picture, for instance, a war-weary foot soldier on night watch atop a castle wall, gazing at the same moon that a peasant boy in a distant valley also stares up at from the shadow of his family's hut. Both contemplate uncertain dawns, sharing a silent hope for peace in a world rent by strife. Skirmishes and sieges became the fabric of daily life. Samurai contingents marched across the provinces like restless spirits, banners flapping and spears glinting in the sun. New technology also entered the fray. Firearms arrived with Portuguese traders in 1543, and soon the crack of arquebuses joined the ring of swords on battlefields. In the sulphurous haze of musket smoke, traditional samurai cavalry charges gave way to disciplined ranks of gunners. Some warriors lamented that the brave art of swordsmanship was eclipsed by this new thunderous weapon, but adaptable generals quickly mastered its use. The air was often thick with the smell of gunpowder and the clamor of Tanegashima guns, as samurai, armed with both katana and matchlocks, fought under skies darkened by arrows and bullets alike. Yet even in such brutal innovations, the samurai sought honor. There are tales of gunners pausing to allow a foe to retrieve a fallen weapon or adjust armor, unwilling to abandon entirely the courteous rituals of combat. Yet even in this bloody era, the old samurai ethos of honor was not entirely lost. There are tales of rivals who showed unexpected magnanimity amidst conflict. In one famous incident, a warlord found that his enemy's province had been cut off from its salt supply, essential for preserving food, due to a third-party blockade. Rather than exploit this weakness, the warlord secretly sent shipments of salt to his foe, declaring, "I fight with the sword, not with salt." Such chivalry was rare, but it was remembered and celebrated. It offered hope that beneath the violence lay a shared code of respect, a glimmer of humanity in the darkness of war. Amid this anarchy, 3 extraordinary leaders emerged in succession, each contributing to the end of the chaos. They are sometimes likened to 3 artisans building a great temple. One laid the foundation, the second raised the walls, and the third set the capstone in place. The first was Oda Nobunaga, a daring and ruthless daimyo from Owari province. In 1560, young Nobunaga achieved a shocking victory at Okehazama, defeating an army many times larger by striking boldly and without warning. This triumph marked him as a force of destiny. Over the next 2 decades, Nobunaga used both brutality and innovation to topple rival warlords and dismantle the old order. He welcomed the new firearms. Famously, at the Battle of Nagashino in 1575, he stationed rows of gunners behind wooden stockades and mowed down the charging cavalry of the Takeda clan in waves, a tactic unheard of before. Nobunaga also broke the power of militant Buddhist sects that had long defied samurai rule. In a fiery campaign, he razed the monastic stronghold of Enryaku-ji on Mount Hiei, shocking the nation with his uncompromising resolve. By 1582, Nobunaga had conquered central Japan and ended the Ashikaga shogunate, seeming poised to unify the realm. But fate intervened. That summer, while resting at the Honnoji temple in Kyoto, Nobunaga was betrayed by one of his own generals. Encircled by assassins, he chose to take his own life amid the burning temple rather than surrender. The news of Nobunaga's death rippled across Japan, a moment of sudden uncertainty. The man who had come so close to ending the perpetual war had fallen at the very threshold. Stepping into the void was Nobunaga's ablest lieutenant, Toyotomi Hideyoshi, a man of humble birth, a peasant's son who rose on sheer talent. Hideyoshi possessed not only strategic brilliance, but a silver tongue and a generous, patient demeanor that won hearts where Nobunaga had inspired fear. In the years following 1582, Hideyoshi deftly avenged his lord and brought the remaining fractious daimyo under his sway through a mix of battle, diplomacy, and reward. By 1590, he had achieved what no one had before, the reunification of all Japan. Hideyoshi, ruling in lieu of a formal shogun title, introduced policies to stabilize the realm. He enforced the famous sword hunt edict of 1588, ordering that farmers and peasants relinquish their weapons so that only samurai may bear swords. This bold measure sought to prevent uprisings and freeze the social order, ensuring that never again could a low-born upstart like himself threaten the hierarchy, an irony perhaps lost on him, given his own origins. The decree was effective. It symbolically elevated the samurai above all others, a class apart, entrusted with the nation's arms and honor. After this point, the samurai became the exclusive two-sword class, wearing both a short and a long sword as a mark of their privilege and separation from the farmer-peasant class. Hideyoshi also nurtured the cultural pursuits dear to samurai hearts. A great patron of the tea ceremony, he famously held a magnificent tea gathering at Kitano in 1587, inviting practitioners from all ranks to attend an open-air tea festival under maple trees. It was an emblem of his attempt to knit the country together, not just by force, but by shared culture. Yet for all his accomplishments, Hideyoshi's final years were troubled. Yearning for eternal glory, he embarked on ambitious invasions of Korea, 1592, 1598, which overextended his realm and brought no lasting gain, and tragically, he left only an infant heir, too young to hold the fractious daimyo in check. Thus, after Hideyoshi's death in 1598, the unity he forged began to waver. Many lords quietly sharpened their swords, anticipating a renewed contest for supremacy. The final act came on an autumn morning in the year 1600, on the mist-shrouded plain of Sekigahara. There, the armies of the eastern provinces, rallied by Tokugawa Ieyasu, met the armies of the western lords loyal to Hideyoshi's legacy. As fog lifted with the rising sun, one of the greatest battles in Japanese history unfolded. For hours, the fields trembled with the thunder of hooves and the crash of spears. Legend holds that a sudden betrayal, a Western ally who switched sides mid-battle, turned the tide in Ieyasu's favor. By dusk, Sekigahara fell silent, but for the cries of crows and wounded men, Ieyasu emerged victorious. In that hush, amid rain-soaked banners sagging in mud, the Sengoku chaos truly came to its end. One leader now stood supreme over the reunified land, on the eve of great battles. Camped under the stars, many samurai turned inward. By the glow of a paper lantern in his tent, a veteran might compose a death poem, a brief verse to crystallize his soul's state should he fall in combat. It was a long-standing tradition among warriors to leave behind such a poem as their final words. One wrote of dew on grass evaporating at dawn, comparing it to life's brevity. Another likened himself to a cherry blossom petal, ready to drop at the height of its beauty. These poems, written in elegant calligraphy on silk or parchment, were often folded into a sleeve or handed to a trusted comrade for delivery to family. In that act of writing, samurai found calm acceptance of fate. The simple rituals, sharpening one's sword, adjusting armor straps, sharing a last cup of warm sake with fellow warriors, all took on a poignant stillness. In those quiet moments, as crickets chirped in the surrounding fields and a crescent moon rose, each man made peace with the possibility that the coming dawn's light might be his last. Such was the way of the bushi, to prepare for death yet remain steadfast in duty, carrying cherry blossoms in heart even as he strode to war. In 1603, Tokugawa Ieyasu was officially granted the title of shogun. He established his shogunate in Edo, present-day Tokyo, and set about ensuring that the hard-won peace would endure. In 1615, after a final siege against Hideyoshi's heir in Osaka, Ieyasu extinguished the last embers of resistance. The Sengoku storm had finally blown itself out. Japan was unified at last under Tokugawa rule, ushering in a 250-year-long stretch of peace and prosperity. The weary land, soaked in blood and tears for so long, could finally lie fallow and recover. Samurai across the country laid aside their battle standards and turned their attention to governing estates, training in peace, and raising families. Villagers rebuilt homes and planted rice in fields that had been battlegrounds a decade before. All understood that they were at the dawn of a precious peace. As we leave the Sengoku era behind, one can almost hear the collective sigh of relief across the archipelago. In deserted battlefields now carpeted with summer grasses, Children chase dragonflies where armies once clashed. Old warriors light incense at roadside shrines, whispering prayers for fallen comrades and for the peace to last. The age of civil wars has given way to the Edo period, a time when the sword would be sheathed and the arts and order that the samurai cultivated could fully bloom. In the next chapter, we step into this peaceful realm governed by the Tokugawa shoguns, to see how the spirit of the samurai adapted, thrived without war, like a pine tree finding new roots in calm soil. Edo, peace in the shadow of the shogun. The bloody strife of the warring states gave way to the Edo period, 1603, 1868, an era of enforced peace and stability under the Tokugawa shogunate. After centuries of upheaval, the realm seemed to exhale and settle into an enduring stillness. Samurai hung their armor on wooden stands in storehouses, where it gathered dust as years passed without battles. The swords at their belts became less tools of war and more cherished badges of rank. Townsfolk no longer jumped at rumors of armies on the march. Instead, they planted cherry trees along the roads, confident that next spring they would live to see them bloom. Himeji Castle, often called the White Heron, stood as a gleaming symbol of this peaceful age. Its white walls and graceful roofs overlooked a thriving castle town that prospered without fear of siege. Each spring, the castle's gardens burst into clouds of cherry blossoms, and families picnicked under the petals where once soldiers might have drilled. In the hush of dawn, the distant call of a hawker selling tofu, or the wooden clack of a Shinto shrine's prayer blocks, carried farther than the echo of any war drum. The fortress that had been built for battle became instead a guardian of tranquility, its watchtowers surveying nothing more threatening than the morning mist rising from rice paddies. A typical morning in Edo might begin with the sound of wooden clappers echoing through the neighborhoods, the fire watchman making his rounds at dawn. As the sun rose, merchants rolled open the bamboo shutters of their shops, and the aroma of grilling fish and miso soup drifted from street-side stalls where laborers bought breakfast. Along the canals, boatmen called out to advertise ferry rides, their voices carrying over the calm water. Samurai officials in informal kimono, two swords at their side, would make their way to the castle or district office, perhaps pausing to exchange a polite greeting with a familiar shopkeeper, though always maintaining the dignity of their higher station. Children with shaved heads, a common hairstyle for young boys, hurried to temple schools with wooden tablets for writing practice, and housewives swept the front steps and sprinkled water to settle the dust. The city came to life gently, beneath a pale blue sky, often smudged by morning mist. In this peaceful routine, it was easy to forget the turbulent past. Elderly folks, who in their youth had seen the tail end of the wars, would sometimes remark how blessed the times had become. The only battles now were in the wrestling ring, at a sumo tournament, or between poets at a friendly haiku contest. Edo's peace was a living, tangible thing, renewed with each untroubled sunrise. Within this ordered society, the samurai found new roles as administrators, teachers, and moral examples. The Tokugawa rulers, keenly aware of how war had ravaged the land, structured the nation to maintain stability above all else. They required the once restless daimyo lords to spend every other year in the capital Edo under the shogun's eye, a system called sankin kotai, alternate attendance, that kept potential rebels in check, and turned Edo into a bustling center filled with the mansions of every lord. When those lords traveled from their distant provinces to Edo, they did so in grand processions, hundreds of retainers in splendid livery, carrying their clan banners, winding along the coastal roads. Yet these marches were not to war, but to pay homage in a time of peace. Commoners would line the route to watch the pageantry, enjoying the spectacle in safety. Society itself was neatly divided into classes in a strict hierarchy. At the top were the samurai, now a hereditary caste of professional warriors turned bureaucrats. Below them were the farmers, who toiled to produce rice, the currency of the age, and whose labor was esteemed as the foundation of the nation's wealth. Artisans came next, skilled in crafts that ranged from carpentry and swordsmithing to pottery and printmaking, contributing both utility and beauty to daily life. At the bottom stood the merchants, ostensibly low in status because they did not produce goods. Yet many grew rich, and their wealth quietly underwrote a flourishing urban culture. This hierarchy, known as Shinoko-sho, warrior, farmer, artisan, merchant, was more than social theory. It was embedded in law and custom. A person's dress, surname, and even the permitted style of housing were regulated by class. Samurai walked the streets in two-sword privilege, a long katana and a shorter wakizashi tucked into their obi, and even a brash merchant would bow and step aside to let a sword-wearer pass. It was a world of politeness and predictability, where everyone knew their place, like instruments each playing their part in a harmonious orchestra. The governing philosophy of this time leaned heavily on Neo-Confucianism, with its stress on duty, filial piety, and social harmony. The samurai, guided by the shogunate's laws, were expected to exemplify virtue and discipline. The bushidō ideals, which had earlier driven warriors in battle, now evolved into an ethical code for daily life. They often spoke of 7 cardinal virtues that every true warrior should uphold: gi, righteousness; yu, courage; jin, benevolence or compassion; rei, courtesy and respect; makoto, honesty and sincerity; meio, honor; and chugi, loyalty. Living by these principles was the ideal of bushidō. A samurai in peacetime might demonstrate gi by settling a dispute fairly, or jin by helping a farmer repair his dike; rei by the impeccable politeness he showed to those of all classes; makoto by being truthful in word and deed; meio by guarding his reputation for integrity; and above all, chugi by unwavering loyalty to his lord and his family. Each day offered small opportunities to practice the way, to choose principle over convenience, to show kindness where possible, and to meet obligations without fail. The cumulative effect was to give the Edo-era samurai a sense of quiet pride and purpose, even though he no longer rode out to war. His battleground was now the realm of civic duty and personal integrity. Honor, loyalty to one's lord, integrity, and benevolence were emphasized as the core of a samurai's character. Swordsmanship schools turned their focus from killing techniques to spiritual training, practicing bushidō, the martial way, as a means of self-improvement and ethical living. In the courtyard of a dojo at twilight, one might see a veteran swordsman teaching youths not only how to strike and parry, but how to breathe, how to cultivate an immovable calm in the face of any storm. The sword has to be more than a weapon, one instructor would say. It must be an extension of your moral being. And so, in peace, the sword found a new purpose: to cut away the self's impurities, metaphorically, rather than any enemy. With peace came prosperity and a blossoming of arts and learning. Samurai who once memorized battle formations now studied Chinese classics, poetry, and calligraphy. Many became scholars and poets. One such figure was Matsuo Basho, born to a low-ranking samurai family who forsook the comforts of town life and wandered the country roads in search of inspiration. With only a straw hat and journal, Basho traveled through remote valleys and along coastal paths, composing haiku that distilled vast feelings into 17 syllables. In one famous verse, he described an old pond where a frog's leap produces a soft plop of water, a timeless sound that fades back into silence. In another, he wrote of the lonely cry of a cicada piercing the rocks, evoking the deep quiet of summer mountains. His poetry, simple yet profound, exemplified the Japanese spirit of finding beauty in stillness and profundity in the fleeting moment. Many samurai, inspired by Basho's journey, took up the pen alongside the sword, believing that to appreciate a falling autumn leaf or the glow of the moon on a rice field was as integral to a balanced life as bravery in battle. Across the provinces, domain schools were established to educate samurai youth in literature and ethics, as well as martial skills. In their leisure, these warriors turned. Gentlemen enjoyed pastimes handed down from their forebears: ink painting, flower arranging, ikebana, archery, and the tea ceremony continued to impart mindfulness and aesthetic sense. A samurai might spend his morning copying a sutra in elegant kanji script, his afternoon drilling with the spear, and his evening appreciating a performance of kabuki theatre in the lively pleasure quarters, where actors in flamboyant costume enacted tales of romance and revenge to the delight of packed audiences. Though samurai were officially discouraged from frequenting the rowdy kabuki shows and the ukiyo-e print shops catering to merchants, many could not resist. They would dress down and leave their swords at home to slip anonymously into the floating world of Edo nightlife, proving that beneath the stoic exterior of the warrior often beat a human heart, curious about life's delights. The common people, too, flourished as wars ceased to uproot their lives. Farmers devised better irrigation methods and tools, increasing harvests. In the evenings, in villages now free from marauding armies, families gathered to share seasonal festivals, planting dances in spring, obon lantern festivities in summer, moon viewing banquets in autumn. Merchants in the cities formed guilds and funded public works, like the sturdy wooden bridges that spanned Edo's rivers and the fire brigades that kept the crowded city safe. They also patronized artists, giving rise to vivid woodblock prints depicting actors, courtesans, and landscapes that remain treasured today. Life followed the steady rhythm of the seasons and the shogun's laws. Foreign influence was shut out by policy. The country entered a period of isolation known as sakoku, so the Japanese turned inward, refining their own traditions to new heights. Gardens were tended into masterpieces of subtle design. Even everyday objects, a kimono, a bento box, were crafted with exquisite care, reflecting the national ethos that finding beauty in routine life is itself a kind of enlightenment. Yet, beneath the calm surface of Edo society, there were quiet undercurrents of change. Some lower-ranking samurai lived on meager stipends that barely fed their families, their pride salted with hardship. A few of these discontented warriors turned bureaucrats, facing financial strain and limited advancement, began to yearn for a restoration of glory, even if that meant upheaval. Merchants, officially disdained, gained economic power that subtly eroded old social strictures. And far beyond Japan's shores, foreign ships with formidable cannons were encroaching on Asia, bearing demands that would eventually rattle Edo's isolation. But on a still summer night in, say, the 1840s, such troubles were yet distant thunder. A samurai might stand guard at his lord's gate in a quiet castle town, watching fireflies blink over the moat, and feel that this peace could last forever. To better understand the gentle rhythm of these peaceful times, imagine a typical day for a mid-ranking samurai official living in a quiet Edo neighborhood. At first light, the household stirs. Our samurai, Masayori, rises from his futon as pale dawn light filters through the shoji screens. In the garden, dew pearls on pine needles, and a little stone lantern, Masayori begins his day with basic exercises, not donning armor for battle, but performing controlled sword kata in the crisp morning air. His bamboo practice sword swishes through the silence as sparrows flutter from the eaves. Afterward, he sits on the veranda facing the neatly raked gravel and moss, takes a deep breath, and perhaps recites a short sutra or a favorite proverb to set his mind at ease. Inside, the household comes to life. The charcoal brazier is lit in the kitchen. Masayori's wife, in a simple cotton kimono, prepares steamed rice, grilled fish, and pickled plums for breakfast. Their two children kneel politely as the family shares the meal. They exchange few words. It's considered virtuous to begin the day quietly, but there is warmth in the clink of ceramic bowls and the occasional smile. After breakfast, Masayori dons his formal Monsuki kimono with the family crest and carefully ties his two swords at his side. They are more ceremonial than practical now, but he wears them with pride, bidding farewell to his wife with a respectful bow. For samurai couples, deep affection was often expressed through courtesy. He steps out into the lane. The city is already humming gently. Walking to his post at the city magistrate's office, Masayori passes shopkeepers arranging goods, children laughing as they chase a hoop down the street, and fellow samurai on their way to various administrative duties. He exchanges cordial nods with a neighbor, a retired older samurai carrying a bamboo rake to tend the local shrine's garden. Reaching the low office building near Edo Castle, Masayori spends the late morning reviewing petitions. Perhaps a peasant from a nearby village seeks permission to build a new well, or a merchant guild submits pricing for rice this season. With brush and ink, he writes comments in elegant strokes, applying the education in literature and law that a lifetime of training has given him. By midday, work pauses. He and his colleagues step outside to eat simple bento lunches under a tree, salted fish, rice balls, and pickled radish. They discuss the unseasonably fine weather and swap a humorous story or two, far removed from the grim stratagems their fathers once pondered on battlefields. In the afternoon, Masayori visits the dojo, martial arts hall, that he supervises as part of his duties to maintain the martial spirit. There, a dozen youths practice archery and fencing. He offers them guidance, adjusting a stance here, demonstrating a precise draw of the bow there. The young samurai in training look up to him with shining eyes, and he takes seriously the charge to instill in them both skill and virtue. True strength, he reminds them softly as they bow, lies in having a peaceful heart. In their eyes, respectful and eager, he sees hope that the next generation will keep the warrior code alive in character, if not in combat. Toward evening, Masayori's day winds down. He stops at a tea house on the way home, where a few fellow officials gather for informal poetry readings. They sit on tatami mats, sipping hot water infused with chrysanthemum petals. One by one, they share haiku scribbled during the day, verses on the turning of leaves, the sight of a carp stirring a pond's surface, or the glow of sunset on castle walls. Masayoshi contributes a verse about the warm lantern light on his doorstep at home, and the others murmur appreciation. There is no competition here, only camaraderie and a mutual love for the arts. The sky outside turns amber, then deepens to purple. Walking home through lantern-lit lanes, Masayoshi feels the contentment of a day spent in meaningful, if quiet, service. At home, his wife has prepared a bath. He soaks in warm water, looking up at slivers of moon through the bathhouse roof vent, and lets out a long, relaxed breath. Later, he helps his daughter with a calligraphy lesson by lamplight, guiding her brush to form the character for peace. The household shares an evening treat, perhaps roasted chestnuts or sweet rice dumplings, as the bell of a distant temple marks the late hour. Before retiring, Masayoshi slides open the screen to his garden and observes the night for a moment. The silhouettes of trees, against the moon, the chirp of a lone cricket. He offers a silent prayer of gratitude for the tranquility of this life, so different from the war-torn youth of his grandfather. Soon, the lamp is blown out, and the samurai sleeps, untroubled by fear. In dreams, he might hear echoes of bygone battles, but they are faint and harmless, like thunder from a storm long past. Such is a day of peace in the Edo era, repeated in gentle variation through years and decades. The legacy of the samurai's long quest for stability fulfilled at last. For over 200 years, it nearly did last. Japan under the Tokugawa remained largely free of war, a rare span of inner tranquility in its long history. The samurai lived by their honor code in a world lit by paper lanterns and governed by precedent. And when change finally did come, in the form of Western black ships, demanding the opening of ports in the 1850 seconds, and the tumultuous restoration of imperial power in 1868, it came so swiftly that many samurai must have felt they had awakened from a long dream. But the legacy of their ethos endured, carried forward in modern Japan's values of discipline, loyalty, and devotion to harmony. As our journey through old Japan comes to a close, we return to the gentle imagery with which we began. It is another tranquil evening at a wayside Edo shrine. The paper lanterns sway softly in a warm breeze. Crickets chirp among the rocks of a lovingly raked garden. A young samurai, off duty, stops to pay respects. He lays his swords aside and claps his hands in prayer, the sound echoing under the torii gate. Fireflies dance over a nearby stream as the last light of day fades. In this scene lies the essence of the Edo era, a society that found peace after storm, a warrior class that found purpose beyond war, and a people who found beauty in the simple cadence of ordinary days and nights. In that peace, the soul of old Japan, forged by samurai and guided by shoguns, could reflect itself like the moon in still water, serene and undisturbed at last.